The man's voice pierced the peaceful air of the park like a sudden crack of thunder as he jabbed his finger toward the little girl standing in front of him. Kids like you are reckless and disrespectful. Who even let you in here? You do not belong in this park. The moment hung heavy. Conversations faded. The laughter of children faltered, and the low hum of the park's ordinary bustle dimmed. People turned, their heads snapping toward the sound of hostility. Phones were raised instinctively. Whispers turned into murmurs, and then into clear, audible outrage. The tension became so thick that one could almost feel it pressing against the skin. From within the crowd, a deep voice rose, cutting through the growing unease. What kind of man raises his hand against a child? It was not asked quietly, it was demanded, sharply, as though the question itself was a judgment. But before this confrontation had erupted, before the cruelty of anger shattered the calm, it had been an ordinary Saturday in Greenfield Park. The sun glowed warmly above, its golden rays streaming across the open lawns and leafy oaks. Families had gathered with picnic baskets and blankets, couples strolled lazily hand in hand, and groups of children shrieked with laughter on the playground swings and slides. Cyclists glided along the winding paths, bells chiming as they wove. Between walkers. Near the basketball courts, a group of teenagers was in the middle of a spirited game. Their sneakers screeched across the asphalt. The ball thumped rhythmically, and their laughter blended seamlessly into the lively orchestra of park sounds. Among the park visitors sat Gary, middle-aged, stout, with a face that seemed perpetually tightened into a frown. Gary looked out of place in this lively scene. His folded newspaper rested neatly on the bench beside him, and a half-empty coffee cup dangled in one hand. His eyes scanned the world around him with disdain, as though every shout of joy or peal of laughter was a personal offense to him. The park was not a sanctuary, but an intrusion. It was a reminder that the world was alive and moving on without him, leaving him bitter and stranded in his own resentments. Under his breath, he muttered complaints about the noise, about the crowd, about how things used to be better. When a basketball bounced free from the court and rolled toward his bench, his scowl deepened. A tall, lanky white teenager sprinted after it, snatched it up, and brushed Gary's arm as he did. "Sorry, sir," the boy said quickly, polite and breathless before running back to his game. Gary glared after him but let the moment pass, grumbling to himself, "At least, he belongs here." Whether it was the boy's quick apology or the color of his skin that soothed Gary's irritation, even Gary himself could not have explained. Not far away, 9-year-old Maya rode her pink bicycle, still shaky without the training wheels she had only recently abandoned. The girl's face glowed with energy, her laughter ringing bright as bells as she wobbled, balanced and pedaled forward. On a picnic blanket nearby, her mother Lisa watched intently, a book forgotten in her lap. Every move Maya made captured her attention, and when the girl stopped to help a much smaller child who had dropped a ball, Lisa's lips curved into a proud smile. "That's my girl," she whispered warmly. Maya waved to the little child, hopped back on her bike, and continued toward a shaded corner of the park where a man sat cross-legged with a weathered guitar. His music floated gently through the air, soft notes weaving a calm undertone beneath the liveliness of the park. Maya stopped, clapped her hands when he finished, and beamed with joy. "That was amazing," she exclaimed, digging into her pocket, and pulling out a crumpled dollar bill. She handed it to him without hesitation. "This is for you." The guitarist's eyes widened in surprise, his rough face softening with gratitude. "Thank you, young lady. You've got a kind heart." From his bench, Gary scowled at the sight. His muttering grew louder. "Parents today don't teach their kids anything. Talking to strangers, throwing money around. What kind of nonsense is this?" His glare was so sharp that Lisa, who had been keeping watch from afar, felt her stomach tighten. Something in his expression unsettled her, but she forced herself not to confront him. Instead, she picked up her phone and quickly typed a message. "Park's busy today. Can't wait for you to join us." The reply came back almost instantly. "Be there soon." Lisa smiled faintly, reassured. Her eyes returned to Maya, who was now riding again, laughter trailing behind her like sunlight. For Gary, every sound Maya made was unbearable. Her joy grated against his bitterness like sandpaper on raw skin. Perhaps it was her innocence, her brightness, or perhaps something uglier buried deep in him that twisted her presence into an insult. That as Maya pedaled near his bench, her balance wavered, the bike tilted just slightly, and the pedal scraped against Gary's shoe. Startled, Maya jumped off, clutching the handlebars nervously. Gary's face darkened immediately. He shot to his feet, towering over the child, anger twisting his features. "What is wrong with you, kid?" he barked, his voice so loud that the chatter around them quieted. Maya's eyes went wide, her lips trembling. I am sorry, sir. I did not mean. Gary cut her off. Kids like you always think you can do whatever you want. No respect for people's space. Her small frame stiffened, fear dripping into her bones. Tears welled in her eyes as she tried again, voice shaking. I did not mean to hurt you. It was an accident. Accident. Gary spat the word like venom. People like you are always causing accidents. Maybe if your parents taught you manners, this would not happen. From across the park, Lisa saw the confrontation unfolding. Her body went cold. She shot to her feet, her heart pounding, and began striding quickly toward her daughter. But Gary wasn't finished. He pointed a trembling finger at Maya, his face contorted with fury. You don't belong here. By now, others were turning. To watch joggers slowed to a stop. A mother with a stroller frowned and whispered under her breath. The once vibrant atmosphere had shifted. A heavy cloud of tension hovered over the park. Maya's tears spilled freely now. Her voice cracked as she tried one last time to explain. I am really sorry. It was an accident. Gary's anger escalated, not cooled. His muttering grew into words darker than before, something venomous that made the crowd gasp. And then, in one horrifying moment, he raised his hand and struck her. The sound of the slap seemed to echo louder than it should have, silencing the park. For a moment, everything froze. The basketball stopped bouncing. The jogger halted mid-stride. Conversations halted as if the entire park had inhaled the same sharp breath. Maya stumbled backward, clutching her cheek where Gary's hand had landed. The sting of the strike left a red mark blossoming across her skin. Her bicycle clattered to the ground as she fell, her small body trembling as tears streamed freely. Gasps erupted from the bystanders. The silence cracked into outrage. Phones shot higher into the air, recording the scene from every angle. Who had already been hurrying, broke into a sprint, her voice carrying across the park. What is wrong with you? She screamed, her cry a mix of rage and terror as she dropped to her knees beside her daughter. She pulled Maya close, her arms trembling, scanning her face for injuries. Through her sobs, Maya whispered, her words so faint only Lisa could hear. He punched me. Lisa's stomach twisted. She pulled her daughter tighter, her hands trembling. With fury, Maya's cheek was already swelling, her tears mixing with dust from the ground. The sight sent fire through Lisa's veins, but she forced her voice to remain calm, soothing Maya even as rage threatened to overwhelm her. Okay, baby, I'm here, you're safe. Gary, however, showed no sign of remorse. Instead, he waved his arms, addressing the crowd like a performer demanding attention. She should have stayed out of my way. Kids these days have no respect, none. His arrogance fueled the disgust of the onlookers. The jogger who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his voice firm. She's a child. What is wrong with you? Mind your own business. Gary snapped, his anger spilling onto anyone who dared confront him. He pointed to his scuffed shoe, his voice dripping with self-justification. Look, she scraped my shoe. Someone needs to teach these kids some discipline. The crowd stirred, their disbelief and outrage growing louder. A woman pushing a stroller shook her head sharply. I've seen him do this before, she said. To those around her, he's always yelling at people, especially at black families. This isn't the first time. Phones continued recording. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. Lisa stood now, still shielding Maya with one arm. Her eyes burned with cold fury as she pulled out her phone with her free hand. Her fingers flew across the screen, her composure chillingly steady. When she finished, she whispered, almost too quietly for anyone to hear, "You're going to regret this." Gary scoffed, folding his arms. Yeah, right. Regret what? Telling the truth. His voice dripped with arrogance, but his eyes darted nervously toward the growing crowd, pressing closer. That it wasn't long before the distinct sight of flashing blue and red lights appeared at the edge of the park. Two officers stepped out of their cruiser, moving toward the scene with clipped strides. The crowd parted reluctantly, phones still trained on Gary. Gary smirked as if salvation had arrived. Finally, he muttered loudly, "Some real authority to deal with this nonsense." The officers first approached Gary. Their tone, noticeably softer, carried hints of deference. "Sir, what happened here?" one asked. Gary's confidence swelled. "She ran into me. I was just defending myself. I didn't do anything wrong." His words grew louder, trying to convince not only the officers but also himself. When the officers turned to the witnesses, the jogger, the guitarist, and others, their tone shifted. "Are you sure about what you saw?" one asked dismissively. "These things can be misinterpreted." The jogger bristled, his voice rising. "I know what I saw. He hit her. He struck a child." but the officers exchanged skeptical glances, treating the testimony with visible doubt. Finally, one turned to Lisa. "Ma'am, let's not escalate this further. It looks like an accident that got out of hand. Everyone should just calm down and move on." Lisa's voice turned icy. "He hit my daughter, and you're telling me this was just an accident?" The officer shrugged, already half turning back toward Gary. "It's best if everyone goes their separate ways." The words landed like a slap of their own. Gasps rose from the crowd, their frustration boiling. "Are you serious?" someone shouted. "You're letting him walk away after hitting a little girl?" Lisa didn't argue. She didn't scream. Instead, she tightened her grip on her phone and began typing again. Her composure was unsettlingly calm, even as Gary smirked at the officer's response. "You see," he sneered at the crowd. "Even the police know I didn't do anything wrong. Let's all just move on." Lisa crouched beside Maya once more, her voice soft enough for her daughter alone. "Daddy's coming," she whispered. "You're safe now." The words had barely left her lips when a faint hum began to rise in the distance. At first it sounded like a low vibration, but soon it grew unmistakable. Sirens. The crowd turned toward the entrance of the park, watching as multiple police cars streamed in, one after another. Their sirens were cut, but their lights blazed, casting red and blue flashes across the trees. The line of vehicles stopped in unison, their engines rumbling like an advancing wave. Doors opened, and more officers stepped out. They did not move, with casual indifference, but with sharp, deliberate purpose. Finally, a sleek black SUV rolled up behind the police cars. The crowd's murmurs intensified. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a perfectly pressed uniform. His presence commanded respect instantly. His broad shoulders and steady stride radiated authority. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "That's Chief Jackson, the chief of police." And then the realization hit harder. "That's Maya's dad." Chief Jackson walked directly into the center of the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the tense faces and then landing on his daughter. For a moment, his hardened expression softened. He knelt, gently tilting Maya's chin to inspect the swelling red mark on her cheek. His voice dropped low and steady, soft enough to soothe but edged with unspoken fury. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he asked. Maya sniffled, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm okay now, Daddy." Jackson's jaw tightened. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then stood to his full height. His attention shifted toward Gary. His voice carried the weight of command, sharp and deliberate. "You," Jackson said, each word dropping like a hammer. "Tell me exactly what you did." Gary's confidence evaporated. Under Jackson's piercing gaze, his bluster faltered. I didn't mean speak clearly," Jackson interrupted, his voice unwavering. "What did you do to my daughter?" Gary's face reddened, his lips trembling. She was reckless. She ran into me with her bike. It was an accident, and you hit her." Jackson cut him off, stepping closer. "You struck a 9-year-old girl. Is that what you're trying to justify?" Gary stumbled over his words, desperate to defend himself. "I was defending myself. She scraped my shoe. She needs to learn what?" Jackson snapped, his voice thundering. "That adults like you can assault children and call it discipline. That's your excuse." The crowd held its breath as Chief Jackson closed the distance between himself and Gary. The tension was electric, every eye fixed on the unfolding moment. Gary, once smug and arrogant, now looked cornered. His face glistened with nervous sweat, his lips fumbling for words that refused to come. From behind Jackson, the jogger spoke up, his phone still raised to record. "He's lying. I saw everything. That girl didn't do a thing to him." He slapped her across the face. The guitarist, who had once played gentle melodies in the shade, now raised his voice with surprising force. "That's right. He lost his temper because she was black and because she was happy. That's the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, no longer whispers but declarations of support. "He's always like this," the woman with the stroller said firmly. "I've seen him yell at families before, especially families of color. This time he went too far." The teenager from the basketball court stepped forward. His face was pale with both anger and guilt. "I bumped into him earlier. Same thing. My ball rolled near him and I brushed his arm. He didn't react like this with me, but the moment she came close, he blew up." His voice cracked. "He's just a bully." The weight of testimony pressed on Gary like a collapsing wall. His hands shook as he lifted them, trying desperately to defend himself. "They're exaggerating. It wasn't like that. You don't understand." Enough. Jackson's voice sliced through his excuses, each syllable carrying authority. "You've been caught, not just by the witnesses here, but by every phone camera recording your actions. Your lies cannot erase what you've done. He gestured to the crowd. Dozens of phones trained on Gary, their red recording lights blinking like beacons of truth. Gary's face drained of color. His eyes darted toward the two officers who had first arrived, the same ones who had dismissed the witnesses and brushed the assault aside. They said it wasn't a big deal, Gary exclaimed, pointing at them in desperation. They said I could go. The crowd gasped at the revelation. Jackson turned slowly toward the officers, his eyes narrowing with ice-cold fury. Is that true? His tone was controlled but deadly. The older officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. We were still assessing the situation, Chief, he stammered. We didn't have all the facts. You had plenty of information, Jackson shot back, his voice booming. You chose to ignore it. You dismissed the testimony of witnesses. You dismissed the tears of a child. And you sided with a man whose prejudice blinded his judgment. That ends now. Both officers shifted uncomfortably, shame written across their faces. Jackson stepped closer, his broad frame towering. You will report back to the station immediately for internal review. This department does not tolerate negligence or bias. Do you understand? The officers nodded reluctantly, their shoulders slumping as they stepped back. The crowd murmured, their anger beginning to soften into relief. Justice, at last, was being demanded by someone with power. Gary, realizing his last lifeline had been severed, tried one final desperate plea. His voice cracked. I didn't know she was your daughter. If I had known. Jackson's face darkened, his tone dropping to a low growl that carried more weight than any shout. It should not matter whose child she is. No child deserves what you did. No person deserves to be treated the way you treated her. The words hung heavy, silencing even Gary. Jackson raised a hand, gesturing to his officers. Take him into custody. Charge him with assault and add hate crime enhancements. Let the court decide his fate. Two officers moved in swiftly, seizing Gary by the arms. He resisted weakly, sputtering protests that fell flat. This isn't fair. She ran into me. I didn't mean, but his words were drowned out by the sound of handcuffs snapping shut and the murmurs of a crowd that had seen enough. Phones captured every moment, the humiliation, the arrest, the fall of a man who had thrived on intimidation, but found himself powerless against accountability. As Gary was led away, Jackson turned back to where Maya sat on the ground. Her tears had slowed, but the red mark on her cheek glared as a reminder of the cruelty she had endured. Jackson knelt, lowering himself to her level. His voice softened, trembling with restrained emotion. Are you ready to go home, sweetheart? Maya nodded, wiping at her eyes with small hands. I'm ready, Daddy. He scooped her gently into his arms, holding her close against his chest. The crowd parted silently as father and daughter walked toward the black SUV, Lisa by their side. Whispers followed them, not of outrage but of admiration. That little girl is lucky to have a dad like him. He did the right thing. Justice was served today. At the SUV, Jackson carefully placed Maya inside, buckling her seatbelt, with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the authority he had just wielded. He turned once more to face the crowd. His voice was firm, carrying gratitude. Thank you to everyone who stood up for my daughter. It is because of you that justice was done today. Applause rippled through the crowd, not the boisterous clapping of celebration but the respectful acknowledgement of shared courage. The convoy of police vehicles began to pull away, sirens silent but lights flashing. The park slowly returned to motion, though its air remained charged with the memory of what had transpired. But the incident was far from over. Within hours, the videos captured by witnesses were uploaded online. Clips spread like wildfire across social media platforms, showing Gary's rage, Maya's tears, and Jackson's commanding intervention. The hashtag Justice for Maya began trending within the day. Supporters flooded comment sections with messages of solidarity. Protect our children. End hate now. No excuse for violence. By evening, local news stations were broadcasting the footage. Reporters interviewed witnesses, including the jogger. This isn't just about one man, he said firmly into the camera. It's about holding people accountable and making sure our community is safe for everyone. Protesters soon gathered at Greenfield Park, holding signs that read End hate now and protect our kids. The park, once tainted by Gary's violence, began transforming into a rallying ground for unity and change. As the video continued to circulate, Gary's life unraveled with astonishing speed. What he had once done in arrogance and cruelty was now replayed millions of times across screens worldwide. His name became synonymous with hatred and violence. At his workplace, the footage reached the executive team within days. the CEO issued a public statement condemning Gary's actions, announcing his immediate suspension pending further investigation. "We cannot and will not tolerate behavior that reflects prejudice, violence, or disregard for others," the statement read. His colleagues, many of whom had quietly endured his temper and arrogance for years, began sharing their own stories. Whispers of mistreatment became public accounts of bullying, further isolating him. Neighbors added their voices to one woman told a local news crew. "He always yelled at kids who played too close to his yard. I even heard him scream insults at delivery drivers. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined." Another admitted, "We all knew something was off with him, but after seeing him hit that little girl, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Piece by piece, the world Gary had constructed one, fueled by intimidation and bitterness, collapsed around him. The man who had once thrived on fear now found himself shunned and despised, stripped of the power he thought he had. In the weeks that followed, the case moved to court. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and community members filled the benches, eager to see justice carried out. Gary sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than he ever had before. His once defiant glare was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. The prosecution called witness after witness. The jogger recounted the moment he saw Gary's hand connect with Maya's cheek. The guitarist testified with quiet intensity, describing the venom in Gary's words before the blow. The teenager who had bumped into Gary earlier told the court of the double standard, the leniency shown to him and the fury unleashed on Maya. Even the initial responding officers were forced to testify, their bias laid bare under questioning. Their attempts to minimize the assault became evidence of systemic prejudice, strengthening the case against Gary. The videos, however, left little room for debate. Played on large screens before the jury, they showed everything: the shouting, the slap, Maya's tears, Lisa's frantic sprint, and finally, Chief Jackson's arrival. Each angle recorded by bystanders painted the same picture: a grown man striking a child out of rage and prejudice. The defense tried to argue it had been a misunderstood accident, but their words rang hollow against the weight of evidence. The jury deliberated briefly before returning a verdict: guilty on charges of assault, with hate crime enhancements. Gary was sentenced to community service, mandatory anti-bias training, and a probation period that ensured his actions would remain under scrutiny. The sentence was not long imprisonment, but it was a judgment that forced him to face the reality of his actions and stripped him of the arrogance he once carried. Meanwhile, Greenfield Park underwent its own transformation. What had once been the scene of violence became a gathering place for resilience, unity, and growth. Community leaders organized events to celebrate diversity. Families from all backgrounds came together for picnics, music festivals, and storytelling circles. Volunteers planted flowers, repainted benches, and hung signs that read "Kindness lives here" and "Respect for all." The park, once tainted by the memory of Gary's violence, became a symbol of what a community could achieve when it refused to stay silent. Maya, though still young, became the heart of these gatherings. She returned to the park with her pink bicycle, more confident than ever. Each time she pedaled down the same paths, she was greeted by smiles, cheers, and waves from neighbors and strangers alike. At one such event, Maya stood on a small stage next to her father, holding his hand tightly. Her voice, though soft, carried strength that belied her years. "I was scared that day," she admitted, her eyes locking with those of the children in the audience. "But my daddy told me we don't have to stay scared. We can stand up, even when it's hard." The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Chief Jackson stepped forward, his deep voice carrying across the space. "This park has become more than a place to play," he said firmly. "It has become a symbol of what we can achieve together. Hate thrives in silence, but love, courage, and unity can overpower even the loudest voices of fear." Applause roared once more, echoing through the park like a promise. Maya's story, though born of pain, became a movement. The hashtag Justice for Maya grew beyond one girl and one incident. It became a rallying cry for communities demanding fairness, equality, and safety for their children. Local schools invited Chief Jackson to speak about justice and respect. Lisa, once hesitant to step into the spotlight, began sharing her story with parents, encouraging them to protect their children fiercely and stand up against injustice. And Maya, bright, resilient, and brave, became a symbol of hope. Despite her age, she carried herself with quiet strength, showing others that courage is not defined by size or years, but by the willingness to speak truth, even when frightened. The park, once overshadowed by anger, now flourished as a hub of unity. Its benches carried not bitterness but laughter. Its paths echoed not with fear but with children's joy. Flowers bloomed in the corners where once hostility had lingered, and music returned to the shade of the trees, played by the same guitarist whose gentle tunes had once caught Maya's ear. The incident at Greenfield Park would never be forgotten. It stood as a stark reminder of how cruelty could surface in ordinary moments, but also as proof of how justice could prevail when people refused to remain silent. In the end, Gary's slap did not define Maya. What defined her was her courage to keep riding her bike, her kindness that never wavered, and the community that rose to defend her. Her story became more than one of injustice. It became a testament to the power of unity. A story that whispered to every child, you belong, you matter, and you are never alone.